Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House of Literature in Oslo. And welcome also to those of you who follow this on the Facebook stream. I guess you have all come here to finally understand why we on Earth are called the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. I hope the following panels will give you a clue. Although we are definitely friends of Finland, we are not the Norwegian-Finnish Friendship Association. 50 years ago, this summer, on August 1, 1975, 35 states, most European states, including those of the Eastern Bloc and Soviet Union, USA and Canada, signed the Helsinki Final Act in the framework of the Conference of Security and Cooperation in Europe. This agreement was a major diplomatic effort to reduce the tensions between the Soviet and Western blocs during the height of the Cold War. The Helsinki Accords represent a significant step towards a more stable and enduring peace in Europe, US President Gerald Ford said at the time. The Helsinki Accords were groundbreaking in several ways. For human rights, for the first time, the Accords included commitments to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, such as the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. This was significant because it provided a platform for human rights advocacy, especially in Eastern Europe. For the East-West relations, the Accord helped reduce tensions between the Soviet and Western blocs by promoting cooperation in various areas, including economics, science, technology, and humanitarian efforts. And for the inviolability of borders and non-intervention that recognized the post-war World War II borders in Europe, which was crucial for maintaining peace and stability. Even more importantly, it established the link between security within, in the form of respect of human rights and self-determination, with security between states. We cannot have one without the other. In these days, Europe is arming itself for security of its border. But we must not forget that we need to, at the same time, take great care to protect our security within, our democratic elections, freedom of expression, and coexistence between our populations. Overall, the Helsinki Accords foster dialogue and understanding across Europe, laying the groundwork for future cooperation and what became the end of the Cold War, because that is what happened. The Helsinki Final Act inspired the establishment of a movement of human rights, democracy, and rule of law, not least by the foundation of several Helsinki organizations. The Moscow Helsinki Group was the first, Norwegian Helsinki Committee was the second, actually in solidarity with those dissidents in the Soviet Union. Andrei Sakharov, Yelena Bonnar, Yuri Orlov, Ludmila Alexeyeva, later Václav Havel, Milan Kundera, Lech Walesa, that triggered the European Force for Freedom that eventually brought down the Soviet Union and its hold on the Eastern Bloc, formed at Yalta in 1945. A lot went well in the 90s. Democratic winds blew over Europe. New states became members of the European Union. Russia was not quite there, but we misjudged her in believing it was only a matter of time. But in the 90s were also the brutal wars of the Western Balkans, Chechnya, Nagorno-Karabakh, and elsewhere. While marking the 50 years anniversary of the declaration, we can also note that Vladimir Putin has reigned Russia for half of those years. During this time, Russia has not only descended into outright dictatorship, it has also brutally attacked its neighbor. The number of political prisoners have increased to above late Soviet levels in Russia, in Belarus, and a high also in other countries. We have friends who should have been here today, Nobel laureate Alice Belaska and all his colleagues of Yasna from Belarus. Grigory Milkolyans, Russia, Anar Mammadli from Azerbaijan, and many, many more. The Helsinki Accords were not enough to stop the war, not secure democracy. But what can we learn from those past years? Which have been the successes we can build on and failures to avoid repeating? Does the OSCE have a role in securing peace in Europe? Can the spirit of the Helsinki Final Act be revived? At some point, maybe. With us, we have secured experienced friends and experts to discuss these questions from several angles throughout this afternoon. I take this opportunity to thank the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for great cooperation and support, as well as cooperation with NORCAP. First, we will have the keynote speeches by Olga Ayvazovska, followed by Professor Daniel C. Thomas. Olga Ayvazovska is the chairwoman of the board of the civil network Apora, Ukraine's leading domestic election observation network and democracy think tank, and a co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory, as well as the Center for War Crimes Documentation, Warsaw-based. And Professor Thomas is professor at international relations at the Institute of Political Science at Leiden University. He served as head of the Institute of Political Science and is co-founding director of the Leiden University Center for International Relations. And he wrote a book that has inspired us through many years called The Helsinki Effect. But first, Olga.
So, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues, since the Helsinki Final Act was adopted, Europe, the US, and Canada have lost the memory of World War II and fear of new mass violence and bloodshed. The law of force, as opposed to the rule of law, dominates the agenda and serves as a preventive factor to further violence. International law developed as a system of safeguards and gentlemen's agreement. The Helsinki Final Act did not take the form of international treaty in the classical conventional sense, but recorded agreements and lessons learned from the World War II. At that time, Moscow insisted on protecting the principle of immutability of borders, but its true aim was to legitimize the occupation of the Baltic states. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, having recognized Ukraine's sovereignty, Russia then occupied 20% of Ukrainian territory and wants to take it all. It demands that Ukraine stop its legitimate self-defense in accordance with the UN chapter and withdraw even from territory that Russia had never occupied, but which have been illegally included into the Russian constitution as a part of dirty geopolitical game. Would this have been possible if the world had reacted harshly and decisively to the attack on Georgia in 2008 or a beginning of the occupation of Ukrainian Crimea in 2014? No, because when those who break agreements faced only symbolic rather than appropriate consequences for their crimes, they kept going until they were stopped by force. The time for dialogues only is over. The dialogues must be accompanied by actions and readiness of the armed forces of Western countries for legitimate collective self-defense. Today, Europe has changed because we didn't manage to stop Russia. This is not a pessimistic view, but a straightforward fact. Sometimes even our international friends say or think that Ukrainians are overly emotional and traumatized, but the truth is that we have accepted the terrified reality and are trying to resist it, rather than believing in wishful thinking which belongs to the world of fantasy. There is no more security in Europe, and all hybrid threats will become real for countries under the NATO umbrellas if Ukraine loses to the aggressor. Just 2 days ago, before this event, on June 9 and June 10, Russia launched 821 drones and missiles at Ukraine, mostly against Kyiv and Odessa. The country that claims to be the legal successor of the Soviet Union, which during the drafting of the Helsinki Final Act insisted on the inviolability of borders and cooperation in Europe, now uses different types of weapons. Iranian-made Shahed drones, Russian Iskander-K, KH-101, KH-22, KH-31, KH-35 missiles, Kinjal hypersonic weapon, and Northern Korean KN-23S. This is what cooperation within the new axis of evil looks like. In the past, at least some statements came from the OSCE, but now not even a word is heard in response to a Russian missile striking maternity hospitals, a drone damaged a St. Sophia Cathedral, a millennium-old monument to Ukrainian statehood and UNESCO heritage site, or the repeated attacks on homes of civilians and completely unprotected human beings. I traveled from Kyiv to Oslo by land over 26 hours. This is only road left to us. Only 2 years ago, my city was blacked with smoke, and 2 days ago, my city was blackened with the smoke and soot, and over 1 million of its residents did not sleep at all on the night of June 9 to 10. Anyone who has this experience, this kind of sleep deprivation and exhaustion caused by regular nighttime attacks, understand that this is a terrific of particularly cynical cruelty. When the Ukrainian security service carried out a successful operation to destroy Russia's strategic aviation on its own territory, the aviation that regularly attacked civilians every night and has been destroyed Ukraine's energy infrastructure for the past 3 years of war, we hear statements from US partners that Russia will face consequences, and then there is nothing. In other words, when partners stay passive and accepting, it is only fuel the aggressor's appetite. I want to emphasize, the week before that special operation, Russia killed 3 rescue workers who were trying to help civilians in Kyiv. Imagine, it has become the norm for our enemy to launch double strikes to kill not only civilians in their beds at night, but also those who come to help them. We are being killed every day, and it's not a reaction, it is punishment for the fact that Ukraine exists as a sovereign democratic state fighting for its independence and survival. The Helsinki Final Act was not just a historic agreement, it was an inspiration, a shared promise for comprehensive security rooted in sovereignty, territorial integrity, human rights, and cooperation. But half a century later, the gap between those promises and today's reality is huge and keeps getting wider. The OSCE, as an institution that should guard the Helsinki norms, it draped in its own architecture. What was designed as a platform for consensus has become a victim of consensus rule abuse. When the Russian Federation, as a participant state, can systematically block urgent decisions not for sake of negotiation, but to paralyze, we are no longer operating a security organization. The Helsinki Act had set expectations, but those expectations have not been met. This isn't because the principles themselves were wrong, but because there were not effective tools to enforce them. OSCE commitments are political. They cannot be challenged in court. And in the name of diplomacy, some states and OSCE institutions often avoid what must be said, that states have violated the core norms they own signed. We have entered a space of double standards where sharp corners are omitted and breaches of the founding principles are observed but not addressed. The OSCE has become a stage where aggressor is still welcomed, truth is softened, and violence are downplayed as positions. So this is not neutrality. I had experience of working as independent expert in political subgroup of Trilateral Contract Group in Minsk, and I can state as insider that the dialogue process is not always accompanied by adherence to international law or OSCE standards. Loyalty to falsehood is not a form of support for freedom of speech. Dialogue that avoid naming the guilty party is guilty doesn't foster trust. Meaningful, the appointment of heads of OSCE institutions increasingly resembles political bargaining, not based on the merit of independence. Leaders enter offices cautious not to provoke, meaningful of reappointment rather than driven by mandate. This result is timely institutions increasingly reluctant to use the language and tools at their disposal, and to this Russia's multi-year budget blockade. The OSCE unified budget, now largely consumed by staff costs, is slowly turning the OSCE into a shell, and even organizer and convener of conferences rather than a political actor with teeth. Field work is weakened, innovation is stalled, vision is replaced by bureaucratic survival. ODIHR reporting on international humanitarian law violations has been reduced to a formality. These reports, one expected to inform political pressure and advocacy, are now posted on the backstage of the OSCE website. What is the follow-up? When is the violence and the voice or campaigning to ensure that victims are heard and perpetrators are named? Let us be honest, the OSCE failed to prevent the large-scale war in Ukraine through the means of its mandate, but what was worse is that today it is failing to respond to it with moral clarity. We are often asked, what is the alternative? And this, is there a difference between reform and denial? If we treat the OSCE as untouchable simply because no alternative exists, we make ourselves involved in its erosion. The better question is, how do we rebuild the OSCE into something that can again serve its purpose? Convening power is not about organizing events which balance panel. It is about mobilizing political will around the values the organization was once created to protect. It is about inviting uncomfortable conversation, exposing violations, and convening not just dialogue, but the vision of the secured Europe. The OSCE still has infrastructure, some yet limited field presence, the normative framework. But if we are serious about multilateralism, then we must stop being cautious. We must act, defend truth, insist on accountability, and lead it. The question is not whether the OSCE still has a role. The question is whether the participating states and OSCE institutions have the courage to use it properly to ensure comprehensive European and transatlantic security. Thank you very much. Maybe it was too tough, but I still believe that Europe will be secured if all people of goodwill and all states of goodwill and their nations will think about common security as a mission and objective, and will tell the truth who are violated what, and will not be ready to organize events with Russian state representatives just for general discussions, because it's useless and it's wasting our sacrifices. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. It's a real pleasure. I was here for the Norwegian Helsinki Committee's 25th anniversary in 2002, and it's a real pleasure to be back. When the Norwegian Helsinki Committee was launched in 1977, it was a real pioneer, the first Helsinki watch group in the West. And the world has changed a lot since then, but the committee is still doing the hard work of supporting causes and courageous activists across the OSCE space. I'm especially honored to share the floor today with Olga and others who are working every day for the cause of human rights in Belarus, in Croatia, in Kazakhstan, in Poland, in Russia, in Serbia, in Ukraine, and elsewhere. And Olga, really, thank you for an incredibly honest and clear-eyed address. Thank you very much for that. Academics like me, we research and we write and we publish about human rights, but it's the activists on the ground who are changing the world. So now for the content of my brief remarks. So this summer we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. This was a low-profile diplomatic agreement that most people expected would quickly be forgotten, and some people hoped would quickly be forgotten. Certainly nobody expected that 50 years later, people would still be gathering to celebrate the Helsinki Final Act. So my assignment today is to share my thoughts on whether the Helsinki effect is still alive in 2025. So it's half a century after the Helsinki summit, and much less important, 24 years after I published a book called The Helsinki Effect. So to answer this question, I will start by briefly recalling what the Helsinki effect was and why it mattered. Then I'll discuss how the world has changed, and finally what we, the human rights community, broadly defined, can do to keep the Helsinki effect alive in the future. So what was the Helsinki effect? The simple version, for those of you who are not so familiar with the history, the simple version, 35 heads of state and government signed the Helsinki Final Act, governments from the East Bloc, the West Bloc, and neutral and non-aligned states. These accords included a commitment to respect human rights, and that contributed directly and indirectly to change in 1989, 1990. But the heroes of the Helsinki effect were not the diplomats who were gathered at Helsinki. The heroes were the activists on the ground who used it to promote change. Now, the reality was much more complex. So very few of the governments that signed the accords expected it would contribute to political change. The Kremlin and its friends valued the status quo, including recognition of borders and perhaps economic contacts with the West. The US government was not interested at all in this. Henry Kissinger just hoped that he could get it over with and go on to doing what he wanted to do. The important initiative came from what was then the 9-member European community. And the European community said, well, if we're going to participate in this conference, we need to have our own distinctly European contribution. And that contribution, they insisted, was including human rights in the agenda. After 2 years of negotiations, human rights was accepted as one of the principles of diplomatic relations, but it was not legally binding. It was simply a political commitment. So how did that matter? So the Helsinki effect of the 1970s and 80s was not just about human rights principles. The principles mattered, but they became important because of the international context and the transnational context. So the international diplomacy created an opportunity for political agents, for change agents, an opportunity. The Kremlin and its friends wanted recognition, they wanted acceptance, they wanted ties with the West, and therefore they were very proud to celebrate this agreement. And that sounds very abstract, but I'll show you. This is Pravda, the official newspaper of the Soviet Communist Party, on August 2nd, 1975. The Soviet leadership was very proud that Brezhnev had gone to Helsinki and signed this, and they publicized this as a major accomplishment of Soviet diplomacy. So they were very proud of this. The European community governments were looking for some collective identity. They had latched onto human rights as the foundation of their collective identity. But the human rights principles in the accords were not new. They, in fact, were much more vague and less binding than what the United Nations had already done. One more show and tell for you. You can't see the details, but I have a German cartoon from a German newspaper. And it shows Brezhnev and Giscard d'Estaing and Gerald Ford up on the top of a castle of cards. And the subtitle for this German cartoon was Helsinki, the Summit of Non-Obligation. So people were laughing at this because these were commitments that were made, but there was no legally binding aspect to them. So that was the opportunity. But the transnational activism provided the energy. So the precursors, the earlier generations of today's activists provided the energy. So it was activists in the East who saw the Helsinki Final Act could be used for a broader human rights campaign. So that was first the Moscow-Helsinki group, led by my former professor Yuri Orlov and many others in Moscow, followed by colleagues in Lithuania and Ukraine and Georgia and Armenia, then Poland, Czechoslovakia, and elsewhere. Then we had echoes of this and supporters in the West. There was the U.S. Helsinki Commission created by the U.S. Congress, but very importantly, the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, the first NGO in the West. So what was this Helsinki effect? First, a new agenda for international diplomacy, the idea that human rights should be part of all diplomatic exchanges. That was something which was revolutionary in its time. This, secondly, a new grassroots alliance around the theme of human rights. We saw this, for example, in Poland, where you had Catholics and trade union activists and social democrats, different sets of people within the society who found that they could all come together around the theme of human rights. And that's why, the next thing I want to show you, another cartoon. Again, you can't see it, but I'll tell you. This was a cartoon from a couple of years later, and it shows Brezhnev and somebody who looks a little bit like Andropov, who was head of the KGB. And Andropov is saying to Brezhnev, we have to find the traitorous comrades who approved this document. So within a couple of years, the KGB had realized that Brezhnev's big accomplishment had become a problem. Yeah? So the CSCE made an important innovation. Now, the Helsinki Final Act itself did not turn dictatorships into liberal regimes. That would be absurd. But people on the ground used the human rights principles to mobilize, to come together and mobilize and contribute to change, which we saw with the solidarity in Poland starting in 1980, 81, and finally the fall of communist regimes in 89, 90. So quickly, a few conclusions about the Helsinki Final Act before I talk about today. All of these conclusions about the Helsinki Final Act are relevant today. First, politics is filled with unexpected developments and shaped by people prepared to take advantage of the unexpected. Second, authoritarian regimes are far more fragile than they appear, often weaker than people working together to demand human rights and human dignity. Third, human rights can be a critical platform for action, but the ideas don't float alone. The ideas themselves are not enough. The international support for those ideas is critical. And fourth, Europe can be powerful when it is united around a common purpose. And that's what we saw in that period, and we could see today. So where are we now? The Helsinki principles remain in effect, but the context has changed. Now, some aspects of today's world undermine the Helsinki effect, and we have to be honest about that, and Olga just referred to some of this. So what has weakened the Helsinki effect? First, authoritarian regimes seem to be on the rise in Europe and across the OSCE space. There's a growing number of authoritarian, illiberal, and hybrid regimes, even within the EU. Ethno-nationalism seems to have replaced human rights as a prominent value. Cross-border cooperation has become illegal in many countries. Right? Laws have been passed to make illegal the type of cross-border cooperation that a lot of the Helsinki movement was based on. And these regimes, if you just look at them, seem very confident. They don't seem to be on the defensive. Second, Russia is not only a military threat to its neighbors, it is an active threat to freedom, democracy, and human rights throughout the OSCE space. At home, the Kremlin shows no concern about human rights compliance, not even superficially. And abroad, it is resisting and undermining liberal democracy across the OSCE space. In the era of Trump, the US is at best an unreliable partner for human rights and very likely an ally of illiberalism. And in this environment, the OSCE structure faces real limits. On the other hand, there are some aspects of today's world that continue to support the Helsinki effect. One, the EU is far more powerful today than it was in the 1970s and 80s. And it has not abandoned its commitment to human rights. Enlargement is still based on conditionality. And the radical backsliding, most obviously in Hungary, has in recent months strengthened the EU's commitment. The EU, in fact, has always been stronger than it appeared. It appears, when you look at it, it always appears like this chaotic group of states that can't get their act together, but it has proven to be quite robust. The trauma of Brexit has weakened anti-EU sentiment, and the combination of the Ukraine war and the Trump effect, that combination has bolstered support for common European action throughout Europe. States and societies on the EU's periphery are still sensitive to what the EU says and does. It doesn't mean the EU always says and does the right thing, but when it does, states and societies on the EU's periphery are still paying attention. Publics still value their ties to Europe. For some, it's about the possibility of membership, and for others, it's about commercial ties. But they pay attention. When Europe speaks, they pay attention. So even illiberal regimes are reluctant to turn their back on the EU. The OSCE itself survives. It may be thin, as Olga said, but it survives. It continues to work with the Council of Europe, with the European Parliament, and so forth, to keep a spotlight on frontline activists for human rights, for free media, for national minorities, and so forth. So finally, what can keep the Helsinki effect alive in the years to come? I'll mention 6 lessons here. What can keep the Helsinki effect alive? One, as I said, remember that authoritarian regimes are always weaker than they appear. So don't give up hope for change. I work a lot with, I have a number of Syrian students in my classes in the Netherlands. And the Bashar al-Assad regime appeared quite strong and was really, really brutal. And like that, it was gone. And you can ask questions about the regime that has replaced it. But it shows, and we've seen this in case after case after case, authoritarian regimes appear very strong, but they're actually very fragile. And that's why they're so paranoid about free speech and so forth, because they recognize how fragile they are. First point. Second, the importance of continuing to invest in civil society, reminding publics that live under illiberal regimes that their state has human rights obligations, and those obligations have not changed. And those obligations are very relevant to their interests, even if their interests, they may not at first glance think, they may not define their interests in human rights terms, but the language of human rights remains relevant to their interests. Whether their focus is on free association in Hungary, free elections in Serbia, free media in Kazakhstan, and so forth. The language of human rights, the principles of human rights remain relevant. Third point, and this cannot be understated, the importance of maintaining a strong liberal democratic community. To reinforce liberal democracy where it exists and not to wait until it's too late. Because without a strong community of liberal democratic states, there is no possibility of providing effective support for activists and others in states where democracy and human rights are at risk. So maintaining a strong liberal democratic community is crucial. Resisting backsliding where liberal democracy is under threat in Hungary and elsewhere. Insisting that the EU continue to prioritize rule of law and human rights for all states that seek close relations or membership. So that's the third point. Fourth, maintaining contact and cooperation across borders, even where it's difficult. And I'm really impressed by what the Norwegian Helsinki Committee has continued to do in this difficult environment. Fifth, supporting Ukraine in its fight for survival, but at the same time, supporting Ukrainian civil society, because what we want Ukraine to survive as a democratic society, not simply as a geographic space. So supporting Ukraine in its fight for survival, and at the same time, supporting Ukrainian civil society. Now, the same is true, obviously, for other countries beyond Ukraine, but I would argue that Ukraine is critical. If Ukraine does not survive, or if Ukraine fails as a democracy, that will have regional effects which we don't want at all. And lastly, my last point, there's an expression in English, the night is always darkest before the dawn. And I know that expression exists in other languages. In the early 1980s, Poland went through martial law. There were tanks on the streets, activists were in jail. And 6 years later, just 6 years after martial law, the same people who were in jail in Poland were forming a new government. Yeah? So that sort of brings together what I said about authoritarian regimes being fragile and continuing to invest in civil society because you don't know what the future is going to bring. So there are still grounds for hope for the Helsinki effect. And I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll have to call you up here immediately, so there will be quite a lot of standing for you. But on the other hand, you are our favorite academic, and you know, when we have you back, far too rare you are here in 23 years since you were here last time. We need to really exploit you as much as we can. So my name is Åge Borchgrevink. I'm a senior advisor at the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and I'll be moderating our first panel, which will deal with civil society, the Helsinki effect, and civil society. I was thinking just while listening to Olga and Daniel about 1975 and the fact that in Leningrad, as the city was known then, there was a young man, a KGB officer, who was running around trying to make surveillance on and also persecute people who were thinking differently. At that time, he still had most of his blonde hair, but I think that one of the guys who really drew a number of lessons from the Helsinki effect, it was actually Vladimir Putin, and that is what you've been seeing playing out for the last 25 years. So yes, I will. We have in this panel until 3:15. Now I forgot my watch, but Berit will look at me with very severe eyes, so I will know when our time is up. But also at the end of our session, for the last 10 minutes, we will open up for questions from the audience to our panelists, and that include also our keynote speakers, Olga and Daniel Thomas. When we do that, we'll have to pass a mic around so that everybody, also those who are watching us at home or in their offices, can listen into the questions. So you have to be a little bit patient with that. Right. Civil society it is, and I can immediately say that there are good news and there are bad news. The good news is that the panel itself, which I will call up shortly, is a proof that civil society still exists in the OSCE area. On the other hand, 2/3 of our panel is either in exile or has been in prison. So there are definitely challenges, like it was in 1975. Daniel Thomas, if you would care to join us up here first. But in addition to you, we have Yekaterina Kuznyatova, who is an analyst from our sister organization, the Belarusian Helsinki Committee. Kuznyatova is a lawyer and a specialist in international law and left Belarus in 2022 after having lost her position at the university in Minsk. She lives in Vilnius and heads the BHK Human Rights Monitoring Program, which runs a human rights index on Belarus. You should Google it and check it out because it's a really meticulous and good effort. Very interesting index. And then we have our close colleague and longtime friend, Yevgeny Shoftis. He's director of the International Human Rights Bureau of Kazakhstan. But Shoftis, he started already with human rights in Soviet times, and I think at that time you were a member of the Memorial Human Rights Society. He received the Helsinki Committee, the Norwegian Helsinki Committee's Sakharov Freedom Award in 2010. And in case you want to know, that is a reward you might not always want because it has a tendency to go to person who end up in prison. But welcome to you all. And I think I will start with you, Daniel. And maybe just because, of course, we are interested in your, somehow you are an insider, but also an outsider, your perspective on civil society. So why could a weak civil society do so much damage to the Soviet Union? And yet the much more stronger civil society we have now has not been as successful in defending these norms and principles of the Helsinki Act over the last, let's say, 20, 25 years?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. Why was a small civil society able to be seemingly more effective than a larger civil society today? In those days, the leadership in the Kremlin, but their allied regimes, that leadership was largely status quo. Their focus was on maintaining the status quo and building ties with the West. And because of that created an opportunity for activists, even in small numbers, to use the Helsinki principles to try to expand space for mobilization. Today's Kremlin is not interested in the geopolitical status quo. They're interested in changing borders, and they are not interested in building friendly relationships with Europe. They're interested in creating their own sphere perhaps with China and so on. So that means it is harder. It is harder. But that's where my second point comes in about how fragile these regimes often are. So the fact that the environment is harder today does not mean that the situation is impossible. I really believe that authoritarian regimes crack. And I can't predict when they crack, but I believe they crack.
I'd just like to end there because, but at the same time, I remember when Ekaterina, when I went to Minsk in 2001, and at that time too, there were demonstrations in Minsk. There always were, seemingly. And I spoke to a diplomat, and he said, and asked, when will Lukashenko go away? And he said, well, it looks stable, but so it was the situation also in East Germany in 1989, and but it is 24 years ago. So I was wanted to ask you, with your background as an expert in international law, and Daniel made the point about the potency, really, of human rights language, how that contributed to the strength of civil society before. Do you think that there is a problem with human rights language now, that it's sometimes somehow polluted in a way, or has lost its effect, has lost its ability to create coalitions, to reach out, to make, the type of coalitions like you spoke about in Poland between church, and trade unions and so on?
It's good that you asked about the language, because, and going to your idea that actually that was supposed to be a very minor, very weak agreement. And for quite some time, that was an idea. I mean, when you read the text, the phrases, then it seems so unimportant. Like, what do you have to do? Well, let people just upheld family ties and have some sort of family reunion. And for most of my career, I would never think of it as an important thing. But now, since I cannot go back to Belarus and my daughter is unable to drop by her grandmother on Sunday, it suddenly, 50 years on, is becoming extremely topical to me. I mean, this is just in my heart now. So indeed, unexpected results are there. And if we talk about Belarus language and the nature of commitments, I would say that since Belarus has never been party to more effective mechanisms like European Convention for Human Rights, we have never been part to the Council of Europe, for instance. It looks like Helsinki process is the only regional human rights system that we have, that Belarusian civil society had a chance to relate. So it's either UN system, universal system, or if we talk about regional system, it's Helsinki. So the most important logo, abide by your own constitution, we would add abide by your own obligations. OSCE process, Helsinki process would be the only language for us to call to the authorities. Unfortunately now, Belarusian authorities are not willing to listen to civil society as such. And then the question is, which allies can Belarusian civil society find to still be able to communicate that very simple thought? And it looks like, again, diplomacy, other states are to help us. And here, the situation with Belarus would be a bit different with Russia. True, we are having this anti-Westernism, right? That's again, we don't care, but not that straightforward, and sometimes Belarusian authorities still do care. And that reminds me, if we go back to history, for a long time, in Soviet international law, the principle of cooperation was actually interpreted as principle of peaceful coexistence. It means that you are not cooperating, but you simply coexist. And it seems to me that Belarusian authorities are now in that particular mode. But that mode can still be somehow punctured, but not, unfortunately, not by civil society, but by other states, by diplomacy, by multilateral institutions. And hence, what we are left with is international advocacy, which we do a lot. And thanks you for inviting me here.
Right. Yevgeny, when we talk about the Helsinki effect, yes, there is the transnational activist network is one element of it that is important. And this is also in Daniel's book related to certain institutions, maybe especially US state institutions from Congress and the State Department especially, that nurtured this transnational alliance in some ways. With your long experience, I was thinking, how do you find the state of this like transnational network and coalition today? Is it still in the same shape? How is it doing, and how could we? Because I suspect it's not in the best of shape, and how so could we do it better? How could we improve the strength of these networks?
First of all, we have to look at what we are facing against what we have to coalition. And the first is the problem with the whole UN and other human rights systems, which practically are broken and are collapsed. I will give you a very simple example. In 2006, the UN Human Rights Commission was replaced by UN Human Rights Council. And according to this procedure, any country have to pass this universal periodic review once in 4 years. And North Korea, Turkmenistan, and Eritrea, 4 cycles already successfully reported about their human rights record. And Cuba, China, and Sudan are assessing that, being the members of the Human Rights Council. What we're talking about, this number one. Number two, the modern world, in my view, is facing 5 enemies of human rights, rule of law, and democracy. These are oil, gas, misuse of war and terror and extremism, geopolitical considerations, and disinformation. All 5 enemies are becoming stronger. All responses are becoming weaker. That what the what the civil society, and I'm the founder of the World Movement for Democracy, call for democratic renewal, and so on, we are trying to communicate and cooperate. We're trying to address these issues, and echoing what Daniel said and others, that sometimes the regimes are objectively fragile and subjectively are pushing. We are pushing that. This is that we have to feel when they are fragile, because besides Syria, Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, which is much more stronger than the Syria. That what we can do, yes, we're establishing more and more networking. We're establishing more and more coalitions. We have a very good relations with the different types of societies and different groups in these societies. But look, even Western societies are weak in response to that. Look at US society at this point. We are all facing some kind of serious challenges. But again, dignity, freedom, rule of law, and not rule by law will prevail. No doubts about that. The question is of the time, and the question is how to pick up the best and more effective means. And this is where the sharing the experience is working. That's why I'm looking very closely about any reforms in Georgia Moldova, or Ukraine, because we are dealing with the same post-Soviet institutions, with the same KGB lights, with the same judiciary, with the same prosecutors' offices, with the same law enforcement, which were never been reformed, which have this institutional historical Soviet memory, and how difficult it is, even in the Baltic states, to overcome that. We have to share experience, we have to look, and we have to pick the chances. I do not, and this is where we are trying to move forward, and believe in miracle.
Right. Thanks for mentioning oil and gas. It's always pertinent to do that when you are in Norway. I guess our relationship and history with oil and gas has been quite a bit different from what most other resource states with a lot of resources has. But I was wondering, just to ask like a very concrete question to you, Yevgeny. And also, it's the same for you, maybe an answer for both of you. There has been a sharp turnaround in US policy over the last couple of months. Of course, we have noticed it in many ways, but one of the main things is the withdrawal of US support, basically, through a number of agencies, to civil society in our region, to these transnational networks of activism that we've been speaking with. What are the consequences in concrete terms in Kazakhstan and in Belarus? You can start first, Yevgeny.
First of all, we have to be very clear that it's not only financial problems. Yes, we're facing a lot of financial problems because of the lack of funding and so on. These are the political problems, because practically US is coming out of the protection sphere. You have seen, probably those who are interested in human rights, that US human rights country reports had never been published yet, in spite of the fact that they were published in March or April. Now we are in June, and there is no these reports. And secondly, it's clear that the embassies are less visible or less active in negotiations, even with the quiet diplomacy, about the political prisoners, about the pressure on civil society, and so on. That we are facing the big drawback, and the problem is that the European Union could not replace that. And this is the most serious problem, not only because of the lack of funding. It's of course a serious problem and so on, but it's political problem with this kind of US leadership trying to, let's say, to raise the issues of security and others without mentioning human rights and without mentioning rule of law and democracy. And it's make our governments much more confident and much more, and their rhetoric even changing. They start to attack Radio Liberty, or they start to attack USAID, because now Trump himself or Vance are attacking. What is the problem? It's a multi-vectoral result of such kind of changing policy in last month.
Katarina.
I will stop in two major things. First, it's about resources and about Belarusian civil society, which, if we look at the civil and political rights, is mostly operating in exile. And as you may imagine, this adds fragility, additional fragility, and if you were having some project and you had some money to pay your apartment, but if that is immediately stopped, then you're in big troubles. And the network of support is much looser when you're in exile than compared to what you have in your home country. So indeed, this funding problem is very, very tragic for Belarusian civil society, and especially for media sector. And we are not having independent media inside the country. That is just to say that. But on the ideological level, I think that, that perhaps that's what you meant when you mentioned Trump effect. It's like there's nothing to be ashamed of, right? You can be a bad guy, you can pronounce horrible thing, awful but lawful and all that. And I think what I am very bothered is that withdrawal of the US from this coalition of good guys may create a picture where human rights is only for wealthy Europeans. I don't want to live in a world where very important moral values are interpreted in an imperial or colonial way, you know? And it looks like we are left to European countries to stand by these values. And that makes it a very sad story. Sorry for being a bit more pessimistic.
Yeah, I think I'll let you go there, Daniel. Yeah, no, I think that like a key thing here is like the
Oh, we have Canada. Sorry.
Yes, good to have Canada. No, the key issue is, of course, the connection between human rights for all and security for all. That link is somehow very crucial to the whole Helsinki effect and the lesson. You wanted to come in, Daniel?
Just a quick word. Clearly, the United States is missing in action now, and who knows when, if ever, it will be back on this issue. But we heard for years that Europe could not replace the United States in military terms. And yet, that is happening now. And Europe can provide the power married to the principle. It can. We have 500 million people. We have plenty of money. We can do this. But Europe has to get its act together and combine hard power with the principle to replace the United States. It's the only alternative now.
Yeah, you said just what I wanted you to say, basically. I think this is like the main takeaway from all of this, and also quite relevant for our Norwegian audience. Just one quick, going back to you, Daniel, you talked about of course, the huge disaster in all these 50 years is the Ukraine war, actually, or the war against Ukraine, which has been going on for many years, but especially, of course, for the last 3 years. Could you briefly mentioned this, how it was a wake-up call somehow, and also, but how would you say that the impact of the Ukraine war, how has it changed our hemisphere, our OSCE hemisphere, our region? Of course,
well, obviously, it means it's a wake-up call that we are responsible for our own destiny. But it's not only the Ukraine war; it's also the continual democratic decay in Hungary. I mean, Poland was able to pull back from the brink, but Hungary continues to decay. And I think there's been a realization at the same time that the war against Ukraine shows that in terms of territorial defense, that Europe needs to act collectively and ensure its own future, but also that it has to take its internal values seriously. That these two things, we cannot outsource this to somebody else. We can't rely on the Americans to issue a human rights report. Why isn't the EU issuing an equivalent human rights report? So I think it's the convergence of these two things.
I think with that, we will open up to the audience and see if there are any questions. And Olga, if we could invite you up also. So if anyone has a questions, feel free to raise your hand. And I see one, not a hand, but actually a pen in there. So if you could.
To check. No, it's not working. Can you?
I think it's supposed to be on.
Is it on? Yeah. So we talked a little bit about...
By the way, sorry Gunnar, I know who you are, but maybe not everybody else does. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, it matters a lot that you know who I am. I'm Gunnar Eklöver Slydal of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and I wanted to challenge you a little bit. It's Professor Thomas, but all the panelists on some of the challenges which is peculiar for our situation compared with 50 years ago. Technology. We have not talked about the role of technology. It's of course about weapons and drones and all that, but it's also about communication. It was very nice to see the Pravda of 2nd August, but today everything will have been distributed in minutes, and for good, but also for bad. So a reflection about the role of technology for, let's say, a re-strengthening of the Helsinki effect.
Great. Daniel, maybe you can...
Yeah, I'm very interested in what my colleagues have to say about this, but just very quickly. So technology is both enabling and disabling for human rights activity. It provides means of communication across borders that can be, the Chinese have been pretty good about blocking the internet, North Koreans as well, but we no longer have to smuggle samizdat in the bottom of somebody's suitcase and hope that it can be smuggled across the border. So technology is enabling, but it's disabling because these same regimes that we are struggling against, those same regimes use technology for repression, right? They keep track of people, they keep track of movement, they keep track of the spread of ideas. So it is enabling and disabling at the same time. And for the human rights movement, we have to be as technologically savvy and up to date as the regimes that we are struggling against.
Maybe Olga, if you would like to add something and to this technological question, but also maybe on other issues that have been raised.
Thank you. So first of all, there are so many different types of technologies. So if we will not follow to the defense sector, because it's this sector is producing amazing things, and this battle is a battle of technologies. And everyone who are not watching cautiously what's happening in Ukraine already step back from the future defense system in their own region. But if we will speak about social media, I have to say that the food chain from 1975 became shorter if we will speak about KGB and final beneficiary of the influence on the public opinion in some of the countries far from the Soviet Union. Now we have direct connection and direct influence between Russia, Moscow, China, and so on, and audiences all over the world. And you need a second to form chaos in your minds if they will target you. And they are very successful. At the same time, I believe that we have to speak first of all about European Union and this landscape, which already produced some technical and legal solutions to protect human rights and freedom of speech against that type of influence. I visited London and many other capitals for many years, for many months after full-scale invasion. And 1.5 years ago in London, I heard from my colleagues in FCDO, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that Ukraine is not united anymore. I had to ask, when you get this information, we are speaking about bureaucrats which have think tanks, which have access to surveys, some quantitative and qualitative information. They said that looks like a mood, emotions. We believers, we believe in that you have already some problems in your unity. Then we organized survey in Ukraine and deeper analysis about polarization in our society. And there is no polarization here in my country because everyone knows what does it mean good and bad and on what side of the history you have to stay. If you are military or civilian, it doesn't matter. Of course, there are agents, Russian agents and Russian influence, even in my country, even under the shelling. But I have to say that not so many things changed from, 1953, when it was Munich process, when one of the killer testify publicly during a court hearing how he became Russian or KGB agent. So nothing changed from that period because we have the same brains, we have the same bodies, we have the same emotions, and we have the same scarings. So that's why technologists, just given a chance bad guys to have direct connection, conversation, and influence on your mind. And if we will not protect ourselves from that side of the new technologies era, we will fail, because we will be believers that we failed the war, that war is unwinnable, that we have to stop to spend resources for this unwinnable situation, that we have to start conversation with bad guys because we want to be in a better circumstances when this war will end. So from my position, the technologies now are using better by bad guys everywhere. And unfortunately, we are not protected enough. And without governments and without common rules in this sphere, we will not protect our children. In Ukraine, Russian agents recruiting teenagers of 13 years old via Telegram channel produced by Durov under the French jurisdiction now for organizing terroristic attacks. And these children do not know what they are doing because they have requests to take back from one venue and to leave it near another venue. And then Russians are, using directly via internet this equipment against these children, and they are dying. So because their minds are not enough aware what's happening with them, what is the causation between the taking some instructions from unknown person via Telegram and their lives.
Olga, I think I will have to interrupt you just to give some time also to Yevgeny. And if you are very short, I will like maybe a last word also from you, Katerina.
Very, very short. Look, these technological changes, they put on the table two very important things: competition of information and simplicity versus complexity. And the bad guys are using this much better because their messages are more simple. And in this competition of information, the situation became even difficult. If we will not learn how to use that, how to respond besides the governmental involvement, we don't know what to do. And finally, we have the case, the minister killed his wife. The trial was public in the social networks. Next month, the law on domestic violence was adopted. The whole country was watching. It works. But how to use it and how to make this competition of information in simplicity versus complexity, this is the key challenge which we have to address.
So, Katerina, this maybe goes back to the question of language again a little bit. The technology and how to reach out.
I think that currently Belarusian cyber partisans, cyber security guys are among the best in the world, I think. So it's
this is a hacker group, basically.
We are not pretending to be best hackers, but I think in terms of safety, we are among the first ones. But I would say that knowing that state will usually have an upper arm because actually Belarusian Helsinki Committee materials are extremist materials. So technically, if you're in Belarus and you're looking at our National Human Rights Index, you are disseminating extremist materials, which is an administratively punishable misdemeanor. So a state will always have legislative upper arm here. And I think here, technology is to be also rule of law, human rights battle as well.
Thank you, and thank you all. We will stop there, and we have a 30-minute break before the second panel, and which will be chaired by my 15, yes. What did I say? Yeah, well, anyway, 15. 15 minutes, and then Lene Wetterland, my colleague, will take over. Thank you all.
Медийная частота. Ты ж пойми, брат, я говорю, да никаких претензий. Я же понимаю прекрасно, чего тут можно в поселке сделать. Но, что делать? Так это работает. В программе или так это не работает.
Да, это осознаешь, как вот это я сформулировала, говорила. Меня спрашивали, типа, все ли у нас успели убежать, и я такая, ну да, мы типа лаки, нам повезло. Ну и вот так думаешь, что как меняет, как контекст меняет ожидания, желания, оценку ситуации. Там, до 20-го, ах, у нас такой плохой конституционный суд, ах, вот у нас есть национальный план по правам человека, но они ни хрена не делают.
Да.
Боже, верните мне мой 19-й год.
Вот, да, я посижу с этим планом.
Да, ну то есть лучший враг хорошего, когда у тебя, ну вернее не так, да, когда ты проваливаешься еще ниже, ты осознаешь, что на том уровне было вообще ничего.
Ну, первые побежали туркмены, туркменские правозащитники. Они все сидят в Голландии, там, кто в Голландии, кто в Австрии и так далее.
Вот, кстати, надо как-то поизучать 30 лет и что. Кто там остается, как они вообще в состоянии мониторить, что у них внутри.
Ну, они лучше всего об этом можно сказать, они сколько, ну, 25 лет, он в Австрии, по ритм-культуре. Ну, выживают как-то, все какой-то мониторинг делает, какие-то связи у нее есть внутри Туркменистана, что-то собирает, какую-то информацию. Этот самый Слава Мамедов, тот перешел обучение безопасности, безопасной коммуникации. И Тимур Мистриханов, тоже адвокат, эколог, он нашел там место, стал адвокатом голландским, ну, для русскоязычных. Вот. Ну, как-то вот так выживают. Вот сейчас мне позвонил бывший зампред Нацбанка, он из жены в Болгарии, в туркменских хельсинских офисах. Вот. По-разному, но они побежали первые. А вот в прошлом году впервые побежали кыргызы. Первые кыргызы побежали. Из Казахстана несколько побежало уже тоже. Ну, а это те, кто, так сказать, решил, что уже тренды сильно необратимы. Мы пока держимся. Никто не знает, как. Опоздать тоже не хочется. Те, кто опоздал, хочется плохо. Ну, вы абсолютно правы, потому что все в сравнении. Все сразу же есть сравнение, там все конкретно. Ты думаешь, да ладно, что с тем? Пока же есть еще. Ну, вот пространство так сужается, дыхание затрудняется. Так же, как везде. Где-то это заслуга Беларуси. Где-то чуть-чуть отпустили, немножко вот дали, как в Узбекистане. В Таджикистане начали закручивать сильно, те тоже побежали.
You are very good at giving short and clear answers. That's good.
I was immediately instructed.
Please find your seats, everyone. Welcome back after the break, everyone. We have a strict schedule today, so I kindly ask everyone to find their seats and tune in to election observation. We've had some really good introductions so far about the Helsinki Final Act and its improvement, the Helsinki effect. And what we are going to talk about today is how we can link the Helsinki Final Act to important developments in Europe and how to look forward. And I think in many ways, our panel is where we can say quite safely, or I'm ready to discuss this with others, that election observation is one of those items, topics from the Helsinki Final Act and the OSCE and the Conference of Security and Cooperation in Europe is something that people know about and remember outside of the former Soviet Union, outside of those serious matters that happened in the 70s. Today, a lot of people might remember and know about election observation as something that is happening. They know it exists, they respect it, and they care about it. Election observation plays a role in society today. And not only successful, of course, there are still discussions to address in terms of political considerations. How are the reports phrased? Are they too vague? What do we do with fake observers? Why is election observation so dangerous that the level of repression is so high on people who actually do election observation? And I have a very great panel here. They could all speak at length about these topics with extensive experience. And we start with Katrine Rådem from NORCAP. She's director of the Climate Action, Peace and Democracy section. And NORCAP is the Norwegian institution which is in charge of recruiting, training, and seconding Norwegians to international election missions all over the world, including OSCE and ODIHR missions, which are the Helsinki legacy, so to say. What would you say, Katrine? What is it with election observation that makes it so important? So threatening that it causes rulers to go to such great lengths to stop and to undermine the election observation? And how has election observation strengthened electoral integrity from your experience?
Thank you, and thank you to all of you also for being here and for those who are organizing the event. First of all, I think election observation has, of course, been part of making elections accountable, elected governments legitimate, but also I think the role of improving and increasing the methodology and the way that these democratic principles are upheld, and also learning from each other has been a very important part of what this work has been contributing to. Because if you want real democratic elections that are, of course, not least concerned with fundamental civil and political rights, you need to have both the legal framework, you need the respect for freedoms and expression of free media, the right to establish political parties to compete for elections, you need non-discrimination, equal opportunities for all, and the freedom from threats. And unfortunately, regarding the last, we have seen that the last part, that this the way of treating election observers is maybe also a symbol of the democratic health in a country, because we do see that in some instances, attacks and attempts to undermine election observation can be a first signal that something is wrong when it comes to upholding these democratic principles. Because we have, by all of these international norms, established a norm that we do want the people's will to be respected, and that even authoritarian leaders want to kind of dress themselves in a, how to say, democratic clothing. And when observers are the first one to undress them in a way, of course they become a threat. So they have, as we have seen, been increasingly under attack. And I think that we have seen that there have been lately very different ways of doing that. One thing is restricting access, bureaucratic hampering when it comes to visas. It's also been defamation and disinformation campaigns, claims that you're foreign agents, different kinds of ways of trying to hinder election observers in being that corrective and that legitimizing force for some elections. So we were happy when a couple of years ago, both the Venice Declaration and also the UN system acknowledged election observers as human rights defenders, because that's an important thing to also safeguard, or at least to say that states' obligations to provide security and safety to election observers is also a very important element in the time to come. Because we do see that this may be one of the most efficient tools we have, in a way, to undress the undemocratic behaviors of governments and undemocratic leaders, and to uphold that and make sure that we can improve the way of working around this, and the international cooperation, I think, around this is very important. My advisor is now in Warsaw for a declaration of principles meeting in ODIHR, which is a part of exchanging these methodologies, exchanging lessons learned from election observation. How can you undress the undemocratic behavior? How can methodologies improve? And how can we make sure that this tool is a very important tool also for the future to come? Norwegian election law has been changed because of international observers in Norway. So hosting also international observers in Norway have actually changed Norwegian election law. So it's not a west-east or north-south thing. It's an actual exchange of learning and strengthening of democratic norms and principles and tools and methodologies.
Thank you. It's a very important point about the election observation, that it's not the election day, which is the democracy. It's everything that is surrounding it, and the efforts made by election observers, not only on the day, but the human rights defense that everyone is carrying out in between as well. We have also with us Adam Busolano, who's a Senior Program Advice Officer from the European Platform for Democratic Elections. And your focus is domestic election observation, or citizen election observation, and cooperation between observers and the other stakeholders, such as Norwegian institutions that send second observers to the international missions. This is also what the Norwegian Helsinki Committee is doing, and we're very proud to be part of the EPDE. But could you enlighten us a little bit as to what domestic election observation is, and how does it complement the larger international missions that Katrina has talked about? How do they cooperate, and how can this possibly be done better?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this excellent event, and thanks to the organizers. And I feel a little bit embarrassed to be here actually in this beautiful place and have this wonderful opportunity to speak with you while our colleagues Ales Bieliacki, Vladimir Lapkovich, Grisha Melkonians, Anar Mammadli, and many others are serving long year prison sentences. And so it's a honor and privilege for me to be here and to try to explain what EPDE is doing. And indeed, we started actually in 2007, 2008 in Belarus, working together with Belarusian Helsinki Committee and Human Rights Center Vyasna, bringing together two big networks of human rights defenders and election observers, and we called this initiative already at that time Human Rights Defenders for Free Elections, and only recently, 2023, I think, UN and Venice Commission acknowledged that citizen election observers are human rights defenders. So it's a very, very interesting development. And EPDE was established 2012 in Warsaw in the Batory Foundation. And Eva is here with us today, who is also one of the leading forces in this endeavor. And we had already this couple of years of experience in Belarus and in Russia, and we saw that there is the space for election observation is shrinking, and we have to establish a solidarity platform, and also we have to speak to the European institutions and convince them that this is our European task, our European responsibility, because back then actually the whole election observation scene, the citizen election observation organizations were supported mainly by the US donors. So it was apparently what we see today, it was a wise and timely strategic decision. So today EPDE gathers 17 organizations from 13 European countries operating between Oslo, Baku, Moscow, Bucharest. We have more and more members from countries from the European Union. The first focus was actually to support our colleagues in Eastern Europe against malign influence of the Kremlin-backed actors. But now we see that the challenges to election observation are more global. They are not, how you said, it's not about north, south, east, west. They are global. They are connected with malign influence. It's about new technologies, misuse of new technologies, etc., etc. So these are all our common challenges to elections and election observation. Being a part of EPDE is also a kind of, a signal of commitment to international standards by monitoring organizations, and EPDE doesn't organize election observation missions, right? EPDE stays in the countries. Our member organizations are those who are in the field where, when international missions are leaving, and they are working consequently on following up on the implementation of recommendations, pushing for democratic reforms. So this is, I think, they are key actors having the key instruments in their hand to actually push for electoral reforms and safeguard integrity of elections. Since 2018, we've been declared, we are listed undesirable in the Russian Federation, which was a clear attempt of Kremlin 8 days before the presidential election day, to stop the collaboration between our colleagues, human rights defenders from Russia, with their peers and colleagues from other parts of Europe. And we also, Kremlin has tried for many years to establish parallel institutions and a kind of parallel world of institutions, with having this OBSE, a kind of alternative to OBSE, also to OSCE, and also providing or developing and initiating the phenomenon which we call fake election observation, and we published a lot of publications over the past decade on. We've been investigating on who are those people. They are going on invitation, paid by Kremlin-backed actors or Baku-backed actors to elections covering in Russia, in Azerbaijan, or even to occupied territories in Ukraine, praising the regimes and their democratic elections. But we also, what we understand today is that this physical engagement of these actors is perhaps soon will be soon replaced by non-physical actors, and we can produce basically in the social media and the whole digital sphere masses of fake observers and fake messages which are cheaper to operate and which can gain a much bigger outreach. So we understand that within this EPDE ecosystem, we have to develop new tools, and we have constantly developed new methodologies of election observation, and work together with international actors, with ODIHR missions, and with election assistance providers. We have to work together with tech companies, with tech NGOs, to collect all this knowledge and to establish, to transform the citizen election observation groups into competency hubs, which can aggregate and analyze the information, and also provide the information to the audience, and in that way work on the election integrity in their countries. So I will stop here because I think Roman can follow up on this.
Yeah, yes, he will for sure, even with a slide or two. So
thank you. You forgive us for making you undesirable organization. It's our fault.
Yeah, Roman Udot, independent election observation expert, long experience from Russia and many other places. You have developed a lot of new methods that Adam was also talking about. How can we observe elections under these very difficult and repressive conditions?
Yeah, but before we are going to speak about the future, I would like to express my gratitude about the past. As a Soviet kid, I never was such interested in newspaper Pravda. You have to, it's a relic, and you have to understand there was a huge number of dirty jokes about newspaper Pravda, because you don't buy that regimes are monolith. They are constantly ridiculed by their own people. That's why they're so weak and fragile, and that's why they're so afraid of electoral data. Of course, they are, like Katharina rightly said, how they treat observers tells a lot. So I'll try to show how we are able to, or try to defend universal rights, and they stick to universal evil. They do the same thing all over the world. If you look into data, you'll see the same problems in Venezuela, Syria, Russia, Azerbaijan, what's not? Belarus doesn't publish data, and Kazakhstan doesn't publish data. If they would have, we would have found the finding as well. But now it's better to show once than to tell 1,000 of words. And we were speaking about simplicity. We were speaking about how simple those regimes, bad guys, are able to express themselves and able to even influence young people. And my job is to do the same, and our job maybe. We can show a lot of data, a lot of tables, thick reports, and people don't read them. We have to do small pieces of videos, and they went viral. We can visualize data and show people how the data is falsified. Simple, easy, it's one of the most easiest diagrams, and you see the universality. On the left, you have the Russia presidential elections in 2018, and how they falsified results in the Northern Caucasus. And on the right, you have the data from Azerbaijan, the parliamentary elections in September 2024, and how they falsified the results. You might mix those pictures completely, because they do the same. Sometimes people ask whether that's Russian hand or somebody I think that somebody taught them. I think it's just stupidity. They don't understand their laws of mathematics. They don't understand statistical laws. They don't understand nature, laws of nature. So they contradict it. And we can show even to a kid. There is a saying that if you are not able to show to a 6 years old what you are doing, you are charlatan. We are trying to show to 6-year-olds that this is like sand in a sand box where you used to play as a kid, and they're distributed chaotically. If you drop a heap of sand or sugar grains, you will see this chaotical distribution. And somehow you see something artificial. It's not possible. These dots, these numbers from polling stations should be distributed statistically independent, but they are just written from our heads. And another technological thing is visuals, because somehow people who are authoritarian rulers, they are not going to look like naked. They need some dresses. They dress themselves. Of course, nobody believes them. Nobody believed in Pravda newspaper. Nobody believes in the data from Central Election Commission of Russia. So they try to pretend that everything is fine. And Putin decided in 2012 to broadcast what's going on in polling stations. And we had, since then, thousands and thousands of hard evidence of ballot box stuffing, multiple voting, rewriting of protocols, and all that stories. And finally, they blocked their broadcast because we invented a neural network that was going to count how many people came to this box, and there's the whole booklet about that over there. This is future. In future, the electoral observation will be semi-artificial, at least. But my story is not about that. My story about the evidence. On the left, you see a policeman who is stuffing the box. And we can show, you can go online, you can find this video, and you can see how a policeman in a uniform committing a crime right behind the camera on the left. On the right, it's Azerbaijani commission, and the guy is preparing a stack. You see that? He's preparing a stack. It is parliamentary elections. It's supposed to be one ballot, but since everything is organized, the woman entered the polling station. She is prepaid, and she is prepared and instructed to receive a stack. So this guy is preparing a stack. Again, we have that video. Again, it's technology, and again, it's evident. In Russia, even I can show you, even schoolboys or schoolgirl maybe, they draw pictures, elections, and they it was aquarelle, it's watercolors picture, how they put some falsifier in the box who was ballot stuffing. So even every schoolboy in Russia knows that elections are fabricated. It's again proved, I can prove it. And my point is that's why in next slide, University of Evil. On my place should be standing Grigory Milkanyans. Somewhere should be present Anar Mammadli. The same countries I showed you before, Russia and Azerbaijan, falsify in the same way. We can catch them in the same way via data. We can do it via video. Of course, they are not going to be naked. Of course, they are trying to crack down on electoral observers, and it is their Achilles heel. For them, nowadays, everybody pretends to be elected. Everybody pretends to be a monolith, like Soviet Union pretended to be, and you know what happens. They disappeared overnight. You know what will happen with Putin if truth will be understood by the most of the people, or whatever happened in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. It was just a point of focus. People was fed up with the Reds since 1970s, but there was no point of focus that happened to be Yeltsin, who called people to the White House, and we defended our parliament. Alpha refused to attack this, and that's history. Now the Soviet Union is over. So don't buy that message from those autocrats that they are elected. They are not, and we are electoral observers on the ground, in the field, in the cloud can prove that. That's our job. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Continuing on that, there are elections in Norway coming up in September. So maybe just briefly, now we're coming to the end, briefly from each of you, what should we pay attention to? Not to be fooled by the autocrats outside, but when we have observed elections in Norway with colleagues from abroad, they say that the biggest threat to the Norwegian elections and the Norwegian democracy is that you take it for granted. How do we create the resilience, and how are we ready to have the resilience against that? Very briefly from each of you before we have to close.
Yeah. First of all, I would say that NORCAP is once again hosting international observers also this year. So learning from also the international community is important also for Norway. But as you said, the biggest threat in Norway is probably that we take things for granted. And in Norway, we have a lot of trust in the political system, which is also easy to be taken for granted. It's actually now written into the new election constitution, where we have upholding trust as a goal in our election law. I think that's pretty unique internationally. But we need to actively engage to keep that trust. And information is definitely, trustable information is key to upholding that trust. So editorial run news sources, the critical actors that can pinpoint what is false information, politicians behaving, education in school on democratic systems, on trusting information, what information not to trust. All of these measures, I think, is long-term things that we really need to strengthen and not weaken in the time to come, to uphold that trust in both our political institutions, elections, and also in society as such.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Roman?
We used to be critics of every process, so I'm afraid to do something. But I think from our point of view, transparency will be a very good story. Another story is they're saying in Russia, if you don't like cats, you don't know how to cook them. It means that if you are not ready to prepare information, appealing information. Sometimes people consider elections like running water in the taps. It was always this since I was born, so it's not interesting. Elections always interesting. You can draw attention to a lot of details. I currently came from Scotland by-election, local parliament, a boring thing, but the local media turned into such a story, and it was so interesting. So I think that we should do the same. We should make the process of voting. This is, in some countries, people go to jail for that. Mm-hmm. So we have to understand that. This is not something to be taken for granted. Mm-hmm. This is a serious thing.
Thank you. Adam, final word from you.
Yes.
Very brief. Sorry.
Thank you. I think in established democracies, the electoral systems are often designed for good weather. And when there is a bad weather, we are facing huge problems. And that is why, and they are not designed to have safeguards against the new challenges. In most of the countries, we do not have systems and regulations. We are talking about this DSA, AI acts, etc., but there is basically, in Europe, there is no enforcement for this kind of regulations on the EU level. So we are not prepared for a bad weather, basically. That's why I think we need to establish domestic citizen election observation. And this is what we see in Europe. There is more and more appetite in many of the countries to have this kind of organizations. They would constantly work on improving the system, learning from each other, from all the experts, providing recommendations and work on the implementation of these recommendations. So this would be my suggestion for, and I know that you're already. Yeah. That you're already initiating this kind of activity, which is, I think, it's a proper way.
Thank you. Norway should prepare for bad weather. That is, yeah. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you so much.
I will invite my panelists to come up, and thank you for the last panel. My name is Mina Skauen. I'm a senior advisor at the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and I will moderate this third panel, which is called the Lessons on Peace from the Western Balkans. When speaking about the OSCE peace engagement, the countries situated in the Western Balkan region is very often countries that come up as examples to be discussed and observed. During the aftermath of the devastating wars, Europe not only got tested on how to respond to war once again in our territory, but also how to respond to a very fragile peace. Lessons on peace from this region, it doesn't necessarily give us a list of what to do or what not to do, but it gives us something and offers insights that you can only get from observing something over a long period of time. And this is pretty unique, and this is what we're going to do a little bit here. And a lot of time is something that we don't have, so I will jump directly into introducing this excellent panel. And when we started composing the panel, some names very intuitively came to us, all of us who have been working on this for many years. And this is why the three of you are here today. We got very lucky there. So I would first like to introduce Sonja Biserko, who is the president of the Helsinki Committee for Human Rights in Serbia. Sonja has been a pillar of analysis and also relentless activism all the way from wars until today. And when we met today, we immediately started talking about some of the same challenges that we've been talking about as long as I've been in the committee, which is about 18 years, regarding exposing national leaders for what they are and how to respond to the same challenges that we have seen over time in the region. Also with us is Ambassador Jan Bråtu, now OSCE representative of freedom of media. But in this context, we have also invited you because of your long experience as ambassador in the region, first in Bosnia-Herzegovina and then in Kosovo. Talking about lessons on peace in this region, the international component is really important. Very few initiatives took place without an international component, like it or not. And that being said, there was not all embassies that had the same outreach as yours, Bråtu. So thank you for having joined us today. And last but not least, we have Ivan Novosel, who is Director of Programs in Zagreb Human Rights House. First time I introduced Ivan to anything was 15 years ago when he was part of our youth groups for human rights in the region. And even though this is a little bit less youthful context, I would say that Ivan is sort of the product of this human rights movement, and speaking from the point of a human rights movement that grew out of rebuilding a region marked by war. And we will just jump right to the same, to the maybe the biggest question, and that would be, in your opinion, what are the most important lessons from the OSCE engagement on peace building in the region? And I'll give the floor to you first, Sonja. And I'll be the timekeeper, so yeah.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for inviting me for this event. It's not easy to speak about regional experience coming from Serbia, which is still and was the major actor for instability in the region. Unfortunately, I must underline this fact because especially now when Serbia is still pushing forward the so-called Serbian world, and when this geopolitical context has dramatically changed, and when other actors stepped in the region, such as China, Russia, Turkey, Middle East countries, and they have different agendas to what Europe and organizations that are present in the region have had all these years. But despite all this, I must say that OSCE has done enormous work, especially after the fall of Milosevic, and it was something that is a remarkable outcome, I would say, in electoral reform, judiciary, police, media sphere, and so on. But unfortunately, this has been appended by advent of the progressive parties since 2012, and Alexander Vučić, who is now authoritarian leader, and Serbia is backsliding in every respect. And I must say that every, influence of the OSCE is diminished, or I would say limited in many ways by the nationalism which is mobilizing the society with all kinds of threats. And this was one of the major instruments of the incumbent government to stall the process of democratization of the country and to keep it in some kind of frozen, I would say, situation, and its approximation to the EU is also stalled because in the meantime the Vučić has started his so-called foreign pillar policy, and was very skillfully balancing in this role, because the West has disengaged in the Western Balkans, and we can say that it is unfinished business. And unfortunately, with all these developments around, I would say in Europe, let's say Ukraine war and Russian aggression, unfortunately still keep Balkans an open affair, I would say. And there are many lessons to be learned from our situation, especially now when we have this ongoing war in Ukraine, and because there are very many similar ways of how Russia and Putin treats Ukraine, which are also same as Milosevic did, and Vučić continued that. Vučić is continuation of Milosevic's policy by other means. So the same rhetoric, the same argumentation, the same kind of emotions that he's provoking among Serbs. But I would say we have now a very deep and profound change in the society. And in this respect, I would say that this upheaval, popular upheaval in Serbia, led by the student protests, is something that brings us to the basic of, let's say, when we talk about human rights. When you have the whole society now, which is asking for certain very important things to be done: justice, accountability, and functional institutions. And this is really something which is instinctively existential. And this is why I see it as being there all the time, that human rights respect can come from below only. Because so far, we had human rights movement coming from above, especially from its elite movement, coming, first of all, by American foreign policy after the Helsinki Act was signed, and it was really carried until now by this sort of elite, segment of the societies, internationally and locally. And in this respect, civic society was also limited. I can say that after the changes after 2000, civic society in the region, but also in Serbia, was very vibrant, because it was in coordination with the international efforts and OSCE in the region. And it was very much, international community was very much focused in helping and supporting in many ways the movement as such. But after this, after 2012, everything changed. First of all, international community moved to other challenges like migrant crisis, COVID, and now Ukraine war. So, so civic society is now in a way victim of this authoritarian regime and Vučić himself, and we are totally marginalized. Sort of journalists, especially investigative journalists, are on daily basis targeted, because Vučić has managed to hijack the whole system, the media sphere, and also he developed his own civic society network, which does nothing, but apparently they are funded by the government, while liberal civic society is very much depending on the foreign support. And now, since American aid is totally cut off, I don't know how EC will will compensate for this, because this is very important to also have in mind, because this part of the society is not able to survive without this help.
Thank you, Sonia. Jan?
Okay, just to follow up, just let me add that I was head of the OSCE missions to Kosovo, which was a mission of 500 people, and the OSCE mission to Serbia before I, in December, assumed my current position as OSCE representative on freedom of the media. And I've worked on the Balkan file without any relief since 1996. So I've been part of this story somehow, and I feel very disappointed. I feel disappointed that we haven't achieved more, and I've done a lot of self-reflection about what we have done, what we should have done, could have done, why didn't things work? And we don't have time to go into all of this now, but let me just say that one of the first things that I would like to mention is that we have to have staying power, and Sonia is actually referring to that. We need to have staying power, we need to continue the work. Now, the OSCE is still on the ground. The OSCE has big missions on the ground. It's still around, I think it's 480 people in Kosovo. The mission to Serbia is around 120 people. The mission to Bosnia-Herzegovina is around 300 people spread across the territory of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So it's not that the international community is not there, and the OSCE is working continuously. The OSCE has certain limitations. We are an intergovernmental organization. And this means that we have to work with the institutions, we have to work with those politicians who have been elected. And then we can have a discussion about the electoral system, and I'm happy to have that discussion. It's not as bad as in Russia, but it might get there. They have different methods in Serbia, and we know them. But all opinion polling, also the polling that's done by National Democratic Institute and International Republican Institute, clearly show that Vučić is still the most popular politician in Serbia, and the SNS are still the most popular party in Serbia. There is a deficit of alternatives. So staying power, yes, we have it in a way through the OSCE, but the OSCE can never do more than what governments and institutions are ready to do. Okay, but at least we're there, and we're pushing. The second thing, we must not be naive. We've been training judges and prosecutors in Serbia and throughout the region for 20, 25 years. And it just doesn't seem to get better. And my theory, my thesis is, these are not stupid people. The fact that they don't follow the best practices isn't because they don't know, especially after they've been trained. It's because they don't want to, or there are other things in the system that motivate them not to do it. And there can be many things. There can be bribery, there can be threats. Kosovo, that's not unusual. Here's 50,000, live a happy life, and by the way, we know where your kids go to school. The brutality is also something that we from Northern Europe should not discount. And the brutality is also quite present in Serbia, especially at the local level. You oppose the local SNS mayor, well, then your kids get kicked out of kindergarten. So I have the benefit of actually worked now in almost every country in the Western Balkans, including Albania, by the way. And so I see the system is basically the same, and they're learning from each other. But so staying power, we should not be naive, and we have to understand that things will take time. And finally, and I think this is the crucial point, change must come from within. It cannot be imposed from outside. I will admit, I have been party to so many attempts to engineer politics in countries of this region. That's a topic for another long discussion. We've failed every time because it has to come from within. People have to want to do it, or else it will not happen. It will happen only as long as we have an iron grip on things, but as soon as we loosen the grip, people will revert to what benefits them. What benefits them in terms of money, in terms of power, and in the Balkans, power equals money, and that's basically what they care about. There's no ideologies. This is another problem we have in the OSCE, because the OSCE is a consensus-based organization. And in my new mandate, I'm expecting big trouble. Regulation of AI, for example. They snuck certain provisions into the big, beautiful bill, so-called, that prevent any regulation of AI for the next 10 years. We're trying to figure out what this means. They talk about free speech, but only free speech in one specific way. But going back to the question, change must come from inside, and we should be supporting the change makers, which means civil society, it means journalists, media community, it means professional organizations. And we should also be speaking very clearly to businesses that want to invest in these countries, that you also have a responsibility. You have a corporate social responsibility to try to support a democratic development in the country where you have put your money. And you should not only buy advertising from the government, the pro-government media, you should also buy advertising, because they have large circulations, but you could also buy some advertising from the non-government controlled media. And then they will say to me, because I've made this argument, oh yeah, but then the government will get nasty with us. And I say, but then you need a foreign investors association, and you need to stand together, and you need to say that for us to produce in Serbia, for example, and to sell the products into the EU market, we have to help you comply with EU standards across the board.
Thank you, Jan.
Yep,
It's many interesting.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Students.
Yeah.
Hugely important. It's a groundswell movement. This is not a color revolution. This is coming from the depths of Serbian society. These are the kids of Šumadija who are rising. Their parents and grandparents are SNS voters, and they are rising and they're protesting because, exactly as Sonia said, they want a decent system. They want rule of law. They want accountability. They want functional institutions.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So, Ivan, coming back to you, who has been part of this change over the past 15 years. How has it been shaping the activism of you and your peers to sort of grow up in this post-conflict generation of activists?
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here. It's been a long time since we were working around the OSCE in Croatia. I left the office, the mission closed, I think, in 27 or 28, and then they permanently left in 2011. And in preparing for today's panel, one of your first questions was like, what were the successes of the OSCE? And I must say that from this point of view, it's hard to distinguish, what was the uniquely the OSCE doing in Croatia back then, what was the EU, what was the UN or ICTY. There was a plethora of action, but what was sure for back then, and it's most certainly not sure now in the rest of the countries, that there was a synergy and a plan of what the international community was doing in case of Croatia that played to, partial success of Croatia with human rights and with democracy. We are not finished with that. We are far from finished, but realistically looking from what is going on in our region, we are lucky that we are not worse. And part to play had the OSCE as well. But I'm kind of afraid that this time is past, is over, and that we are not seeing that on the ground anymore. Back then, when we met, and then when I started my activism, I was still in high school, and that synergy and that presence of the international community trying to support building of democracy, trying to support building of the human rights culture was not present on the institutional level. And that was a mistake that, and I would argue the best lesson from the Western Balkans, from the Croatia, but also from the Western Balkans, is that, all of this path towards the EU was never, unfortunately, designed also to change the society. It was always interaction with the state institutions, between the international institutions and then the local state institutions. EU, OSCE, and the other players on the ground, disrespectful of who they are, they were never investing enough into education. And this is the component that was missing back then, it's missing now, and this is the price that we are paying now, that we are with unfinished human rights values in our society, or that we are going backwards. What I think was the best take that myself and people in my generation had at that time from the OSCE, and I mean from the engagements from the Helsinki Committee, in this sphere of Helsinki committees was you working, investing in the youth there. So we were part of a movement on a regional level that on a yearly basis managed to connect more than 100 high school students. I was the first time in Serbia in 2007. I was lucky enough that I was not born in part of Croatia that was affected with the war. I'm northwest from Zagreb. Luckily, didn't have anyone affected as well, so no victims, nothing like that. My parents were not luckily internationalistic thing, but I remember going for the first time to Serbia because of the narratives that I was exposed. I feel like I was going to a wild savages, part of the world. That changed. That gave me the opportunity to change. Not only to fight with the stereotypes that I didn't know I had, but it also helped me to build me what I am today. I'm not an activist anymore. I work in the human rights also as a profession, but also as a prophecy, to what I believe. But we managed to in those years build a connection of the people that are right now trying to move things forward. But to go back to what the ambassador was mentioning, there is also a lesson for us as part of international community as well. You cannot build a democracy and human rights culture within 10 years, within 15 years. It has to be long-term, cross-generational investment. You have to be present over there. So I would say that OSCE, if you're going back to what were the successes of the OSCE in Croatia, it left too early. Partial successes of Croatia not having such problems with elections right now was because OSCE was doing things right at that point. But it left too early, for instance, on issues regarding like transitional justice and reconciliation. That was the organization that was instrumental for Croatia starting to prosecute war crime trials committed by Croatian forces before the national courts. But it was not enough to pass a judgment against Mirko Norac only. That was the highest profile case at that point. There's an argument to be made that the international organizations should have stayed there longer, because forces that were created back at home to kind of lead that torch, it has to be the domestic endeavor, were too weak. We are still too weak, Even Croatia now in the EU, it's even too weak to politically stand where we want it to stand. And this is, you know, what we are also conveying to our partners in the EU. If you don't want Croatia to get under the Hungarian influence when it comes to, I don't know, LGBT policies in the EU, then German government and French government has to clearly say, Croatian government, you are going to join our declaration that condemns banning the pride, which again didn't happen.
Thank you, Ivan. I think one of the most important lessons about the Balkans is that there's still a lot of important discussions to be had. We're getting closer to the end, so I would very much like to invite you to give short comments, like from what these lessons can be used for now. Ivan, you already started on it a little bit. How can we take some of these lessons? Most of you have mentioned this stayer capability, this longitude of engagement. How can we use this in Europe today? Hungary has been mentioned in polarization. Ukraine has been mentioned in polarization. I can start with you, maybe, Jan. You took ending with civil society, of course.
Okay. No, okay. Well, just a comment to Ivan. The OSCE didn't want to leave Croatia. They were kicked out. The Croatian government didn't want them there. And every OSCE mission is in the host country at the pleasure of the host authorities. The first OSCE mission to Serbia was the OSCE mission of long duration to Vojvodina, Sanjak, and Kosovo in 1992. It was also led by a Norwegian diplomat, Tore Berg. They lasted 11 months before they were asked to leave. So this is the issue with the OSCE, because we don't have executive power. We can't go around telling people that they must do what we say. We have to convince them to do what they say. On the war crimes prosecutions in the region is something I've also worked a lot on. Sonia has as well. It's not actually war crime prosecution cooperation between Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina is good. Files are being handed over, and there are prosecutions in Serbia. They're slow, but it's happening. Croatia, nema ništa. Why? Why? Because when Serge Brammertz raises this issue, he said, but we are members of the EU, so don't come here and tell us. So that's to your point, Ivan. Yep. So EU has to stand for something. So I think I would just recapitulate and say, look, the OSCE can still do good work. The work has to be based on expertise, longevity. We have to stay there. We have to have trust. We have to have trust with authorities that we're not working for the opposition, even though we can be critical, and we should be critical of governments in place. And we also need the trust of civil society and media community.
Thank you, Jan. Sonia, can you also, just 1 minute, please, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I agree with what has been said already, but I think one important aspect of what should be done in the region, especially in Serbia, is education, as has been mentioned, and how to change historical narratives, which are now central battlegrounds, and we have continuous war now about interpretation of what has happened. Unfortunately, despite the legacy of ICTY, which is enormous and important, the impact on the society, let's say in Serbia, is zero, because ICTY and everything and its legacy is totally undermined by legal community. They are the most engaged segment of the society in sort of blowing up the ICTY legacy, and this is immediately transferred to the educational system, to the media sphere. So apparently where we stand now as a society, we are the biggest victims of NATO intervention and the exodus of Serbs from Croatia. So these are the only 2 points mentioned in our public sphere, schools and media, culture, and so on. So this is, for the neighboring countries, especially for Bosnia, it's unacceptable. You cannot normalize relations if the one side denies anything done in Bosnia, especially Srebrenica as a symbol of the genocidal policy, Serbian policy in Bosnia. And especially these days, as it is 30th anniversary, it is intensified, denial on all levels. Even those who are recognizing genocide in Srebrenica, they claim that Serbia was not involved because RCJ passed such a resolution that judgment that Serbia only didn't prevent, but the international community neither prevented genocide in Bosnia because they called it ethnic cleansing in 92, 93, 94 until it came to this ultimate point of genocide in Srebrenica when they morally collapsed. So therefore, it is really something that anyone from Serbia, anyone who is able to sort of understand what was going on in these wars should really be able to recognize this and to explain to younger generations why it happened, how it happened, because you cannot expect these young students to open up this issue without knowing anything. They hardly refer to any of these points that I mentioned that they know anything about it. So I think the major sort of effort should be made to help them understand for the beginning. That's why we started this project on youth history, because they don't know what is Yugoslavia. When Yugoslavia collapsed...
Sonia, we're out of time.
Oh, okay.
I'm so
we
sorry.
have different emotions.
Yeah, we have a lot. Ivan, do you have something, a final sentence also to say?
Just one thing, if we lower our expectations from the political, I think, to like really, not technical, but like human rights, more focused, I think OSCE has a role to play and has a significant role to play. Just to flag out, the OSCE work in Croatia on hate crime prevention, especially with the police, raising the standards, training them, played out. Like we advanced in that field. And this is how, we could maybe use it, and maybe sometimes also tell this story, which is important.
Thank you all. There's obviously a lot of more discussions to be had about the Western Balkans, and thank you to this panel.
So I will ask the panelists of the fourth and last panel to come up to the stage. I realize that this seminar in a way illustrates one of the points that you have to have this ability to stay and to work effectively for a long time. We didn't make a lot of breaks in the program, so it's tight and in a way maybe a little bit tough, but it's for a good purpose. So the OSCE, as we have heard, do a lot of good things. It makes a difference. It costs around 140, 150 million euros a year to run by its 57 participating states. I think negotiations on the 2025 budget is still ongoing. Yes. Ambassador says yes. So it doesn't seem very easy to achieve consensus these days. The return on this investment is quite remarkable, I would say, in terms of services related to strengthening human rights, the rule of law and democracy, unbiased reporting, election observation, discussion forums, unique meeting places for NGOs, and much more. Although the OSCE is not widely reported in mainstream media, it has made essential contributions to improve the lives of millions of people from Vladivostok to Vancouver. However, if you compare the costs of running the OSCE to buying fighter jets, it's quite striking. Norway has bought F-35 fighter jets from the US for 163 million euros for each fighter jet. So running OSCE 1 year is less costly than buying one fighter jet. Maybe you expect me then to ask the panelists, should Norway stop buying all these fighter jets and give the money to do OSCE? I will not ask that question. I will start with Ambassador Ellen Svendsen, Norway's ambassador to the OSCE, which has a quite interesting background because you used to work with NATO before. So it seems that at this time of European or maybe world history, this kind of hard military power and security is strengthening its appeal to politicians. And I would not deny it's necessary to think about military security, NATO-type security, as I call it. And the kind of comprehensive security. If you say OSCE to someone who loosely heard about the organization, maybe comprehensive security is one of the concepts they know about. So I will ask you, from your new perspective in Vienna, is there a future for the kind of comprehensive security that the OSCE brought to life 50 years ago, and which has maybe not prevented wars, but certainly been very important in rebuilding war-torn society and relations between conflicting countries?
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for having us. The short answer is yes. I think there is still room for comprehensive security. I think you're absolutely right, though, that what you call the hard military security obviously has a different ring these days, and I'm sure you've talked about this throughout the seminar. I mean, the geopolitical situation has fundamentally changed because of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that is a fact, and that has, of course, also had a great impact on the OSCE. And I don't think it's not a secret that it is an organization in deep crisis, and that's why I'm very happy also to hear that there are views that it still has a role. I just arrived and I heard some of the previous panelists point that out, and I think that's important. And I think one of the things you mentioned points to the visibility of the OSCE these days. As you said, it used to be an organization that had a lot of attention because of the comprehensive security approach, and these days it has perhaps come a little bit on the back burner. But I have to say that having worked almost a year in Vienna, there are many crises, there are many disappointments, and I think one of the big disappointments, of course, was that the expectation of an organization that is supposed to help prevent conflicts and wars had one participating state attacking another. But I still believe that in this chaos, there is need to focus on a broader view of security. And the OSCE is not a military organization. It's a security organization with this unique human dimension. And it's in times like this that we need to keep working on this comprehensive concept. And I do believe that there is a future for it. I can elaborate, but I'm sure you want to.
Yeah, I just have one follow-up question. In Vienna, do you feel that there is any real dialogue with Russia?
No. I would say that we need to hold Russia accountable for the full-scale aggression, and that is being done in the OSCE these days. At the same time, we need to prepare for a day after the war at some point. We don't know when. And I think one of the challenges of the OSCE today is to prepare a little bit for the unknown. at the same time, it is, and I have been surprised, and I think someone mentioned it just before, how much concrete work the OSCE is still carrying out and how many results you can have. And as you said, it's actually very good value for the money. It's a great deal, as some would perhaps say these days when you look at it from a financial perspective. But there is a lot, many challenges, and I would say that a main focus for us now is also to hold Russia accountable.
Eva, you have a difficult last name. I will not even pronounce it correctly. Kulik-Bielinska.
Very well, you speak like a Pole.
Thank you. You have a very long experience in Polish and European civil society. One of my questions is still the OSCE relevant for civil society? Can we use it better than we use it today? I mean, Warsaw is really one of the meeting places for civil society, at least from eastern parts of Europe. I don't see many Western organizations going there. What is your perspective on how can this be made even more effective?
Sure, OSCE is very relevant for civil society in Central Eastern Europe. Certainly in those countries in which, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, there are governments that want to cooperate. If there are governments that don't want to cooperate, then again, OSCE is a relevant actor, but more I would say as a framework of reference. More a little bit as it was in 1977 when the different Helsinki committees were established in then communist countries, where the Helsinki Accords were taken at the face value as something that we can use as an instrument to support and sustain the right for certain to simply have rights. And it was very important in these times because although in the communist constitutions, for example, in Poland, formally we have freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom even to a right to work, but these freedoms and rights were only formal and practical. And once the powers signed the agreement in which they pledged to respect and sustain these values, then we have, space and a platform and a reference framework which we can use and say, you are not doing it. And then you can appeal to different, bodies presenting and documenting the violation of the rights and violation of the commitments that were made. So for civil society, there's as many possible actors to which we can refer to and ask for support and who can amplify our voices. Because, even having all this social media, we are still speaking in a bubble and we are not treated as, actors that could speak up at certain gatherings and highlight certain issues. So the relevance of OSCE is the cooperation with the civil society organizations, picking up the evidence that is being collected by them, helping to amplify the statements that they are making, and also this element of mutual learning, I would say. On one hand, we are learning from different guidelines and manuals that are being presented, that are being put together by OSCE from the experiences they gather from other countries, and we feed them with their experiences and practices on the ground, which they can share with the others that they are working. So there's I believe it's still relevant, and it's very important how to amplify its role. I think maybe if you cannot work with the governments, do work with the civil society as long as it is there.
Thank you. Olga, you already spoke quite honestly and forcefully about the failure of, let's say, the European security architecture. It didn't prevent Russia from attacking Russia. Ukraine. Sorry.
Or Russia from attacking.
What is your perspective about this kind of soft security? Is it dead just for now, or do you see a future where it can become really relevant again?
So I believe in soft security even more than in hard security. If you are not invaded by Russia already, you still have a chance. And that's why OSCE institutions still have a job and objectives and some mission. Because if we are speaking about independent institutions, which doesn't have enough resources because Russia cut budget, for sure they have to be independent and they have to work on that objectives. So soft security is about everything now. For example, I mentioned before Telegram. You know that Telegram already has 1 billion of followers. And trust me, if it's not a problem yet in Norway or in Poland, it will be a problem and disaster. In 2021, Telegram had only 22% of the audience in Ukraine who following the news, political news, and other. So it wasn't so popular before. Now it's from 73 till 80%. But a few days ago, it was investigating journalism publication that Durov still has direct conversations with FSB, Federal Security Service of Russia, which is Putin's KGB now. So he looked like political, refugee from Russia some years ago, but he visited more than 50 times Russia without any problems with his security and access to Kremlin. What's happening with us? And only 2% from these 1 billion, almost 1 billion followers, using secret chats. So that means 98% of the followers don't protecting their data, personal data, and communications from that people who has access to the heart of this infrastructure. It means that if owner and CEO of this network has direct connection and successful communication with FSB, and 98% of the followers do not protect the data, for 100% FSB has all access to the information about our private connections, communications, and so on and so forth. Because this messenger didn't use this secret chat as it is, as a part of the developed system. So even if you will use Signal or WhatsApp without some special knowledges, the owners and administrators will not know your detailed information or private information. So back to OSCE, I still believe that if we have so big threat from businesses, and if EU already is fighting for not just GDPR, but punishment of that owners and that channels which are misusing of their popularity against safetiness of the citizens in this region, OSCE has to do the same, because OSCE has institutions which are responsible on, again, security, media, freedom of speech, and so on and so forth. This is about that. If you can change the statute because you don't have it, you have to change some instructions or guidelines for that institutions who are still following you. And this is about OSCE ODIHR, first of all. But of course, the problem with resources are producing another problem of dysfunctionality of the office. And sometimes it's about rules. For example, when we had some previous negotiation with OSCE ODIHR office in Warsaw about potential post-war elections in Ukraine, they said that it is a problem even now to visit Kyiv. So, if Macron, Merz, Duda have a chance to visit Kyiv, why staffer of OSCE ODIHR can't, because their protection is tougher than for international leaders. So that's why let's ban that rules which are protecting you from activities. And this is about very, very local level changes, which may change everything. And the last point about, proactive position and defending of your own stuff. You may not know, but when full-scale invasion was started, many representatives of international organizations with Ukrainian passports were not under the interests of that organizations. Even some months before full-scale invasion, few representatives of OSCE, but with Ukrainian passports, were kidnapped and imprisoned in Siberia. So they are in Russian Federation now. What OSCE is doing for liberation of their representatives? If you can't protect even your staff and negotiate directly that let's do that, because they have to be protected, they have some diplomatic protection, so how we can believe that OSCE can do something bigger? But I'm still a believer that soft power is very helpful if we are enough smart to think about prevention. And here and there, it's still possible. First of all, I'm really believe that social media and new technologies are not protected us from totalitarian and authoritarian regime. And this is about basic, work on this field. And I have to say that my son is here. He is more than 13 years old. He has more than 13 years old now. When he was born, he had just 1 month. And I left him in Kyiv and visited Warsaw to participate on human dimension implementation meetings. Do you know why? Because it was a year before parliamentary elections in Ukraine. And I knew that it will be problematic because Yanukovych became president and he did an awful things like change to constitution and so on and so forth. And the main, motivation for me was being there, that it was a word, implementation. Now OSCE has just conference, human dimension conference. They cut it word, implementation. So nobody caring what we'll be speaking there about, because nobody take it into the account for their policies making process and obligation to protect that policies again. So sorry for my long and maybe emotional speech because I'm Ukrainian. But I have to say that OSCE still has independent mechanism, like Moscow mechanism, for example, or institutions as OSCE ODIHR, and we have to focus on that possibility to change the situation in Europe.
I think, Olga, what you are saying is that there is need to update the OSCE to new challenges and new situations. Maybe I can interpret you as saying that it's a little bit old-fashioned diplomatic organization, which is not really up to the social media challenges to deal with situations in Ukraine in an effective way. Ambassador Ellen, is there something there that the toolbox of the OSCE has to be rethought, and maybe there are need for other measures? You ended up with the Moscow mechanism, which is a reporting mechanism, but what does those reports mean without implementation?
I think that's a very good question. I mean, on the Moscow mechanism, I think that for it to be efficient, it needs to be followed up by all of those who have invoked it. I think that it has an effect. I think we see that in Vienna, that it's very uncomfortable for countries to have the Moscow mechanism invoked against them, even though it's just a diplomatic tool. It's true that it doesn't carry any sanctions. I also think that, for instance, in the case of Ukraine, it can work or it can function as a way of documentation of crimes committed by the participating state. And I think that is an important and valuable instrument also for the future. But it does require that we keep following up on the mechanism. The good thing about these kinds of mechanism in the current political climate, where, as you mentioned, we do not reach consensus, and so we are not making decisions most of the time, and that is a challenge. These kinds of mechanisms can nevertheless be invoked by a small, or actually just by one state, participating state, and that does give some leverage, I think, within the organization. To your question on the toolbox, yes, I think in general, and I agree that the OSCE needs to update itself. I think that's a process that the organization is going through. That goes back to the completely changed security landscape that I mentioned initially. I also think that we have a lot of tools that we're not using, and I think that is also part of the job of the participating states, to make use of many of the instruments that we have. When it comes to, I think a lot of good work is being done on social media. It is a challenge. I know that Jan is here, RFOM. I know they are doing a lot on social media. Social media is a possibility. It's an opportunity, but it's also it's a challenge in the current climate, the way it can also be misused as a hybrid tool against and undermine our democratic societies. So I think it's this twofold approach that we need to take as well to for instance, new technology and social media. And I agree, we very much deplore that the implementation conference in Warsaw is only a conference now and not implementation. I do think, however, that it is still used, that at least that's my experience from having been there, that it is still a useful platform for encounters between participating states and civil society. And I think there's more we can do to render that platform relevant, even in the current situation that we're in.
Thank you. The OSCE, or CSE, as it was before, was always accused of being a talking club without effect. I think our enthusiasm with Professor Thomas' book was that he proved that wrong. It was a talking club, but there were effects. So looking ahead, I think one of the most groundbreaking things that Russia's war against Ukraine has led to is the inclusion of the crime of aggression into serious international law. And we know there will be a tribunal, a special tribunal for aggression. And I'm happy that Olga smiles when I say that, because I know that you were advancing and advocating for that for a long time. This is, I think, example of something missing in the Helsinki process, the enforcement mechanisms. And I want to give the word to Olga at the end. What do you think about this special tribunal? What can it do? How can it help justice and accountability in this situation?
So thank you for this pass, because we had a small talk before about that, and I have to say that each of us has to change a little bit their career if it's more needable now to be focused on one topic instead of another. So, and last year I defended my master's degree about ad hoc trial and crime of aggression. So, because this international perspective, how to punish those people who signed an act to start aggression has to be punished, because they are responsible of all other type of crimes which are happening now. And you may know that today it is anniversary, but not about calendar. Even our partners from other embassies publish the data that today is 1 million soldiers, Russian soldiers, is the statistic of this war. So they were killed in Ukraine, died, or became people with disability. 1 million Russians. I will not provide you more data about other type of destructions in Ukraine, but I have to say that this is about Russian interest to punish their own dictator because, you know, they lost 1 million of population because of this war. And unfortunately, UN level is not very useful for establishing that trial. ICC doesn't have any potential tools for start the punishment of crime of aggression because there were huge talks about how to prevent punishment of the big guys who sometimes use the occupation and crime of aggression against neighbors. But sometimes it wasn't just about Eastern Europe or Asia, it was about Western world. And we have to do these lessons learned. And I believe that when it was enough organized and planned these 3 years of discussions on the level of between states who are willing to participate on the global justice, we have the result now that the agreement about establishment of the trial on the basis of Council of Europe was signed by ministers of justice, and then potentially we will have official and public track next year. So everything like that is about political will, because lawyers can find many excuses why it's impossible. But those people who have a good will have enough mandates to find flexible solution for that criminals. And that's why I'm very optimistic here. But each of the states who will participate on this process will be invested into their own security in the future, because the neighbors will know, even if ICC was blocked because of some of the challenges and amendments to Rome Statute, we have to find another solutions, and the trial will be created. So I will not continue more, but I have to say that Norway, Poland were always on our side here, and I'm very proud that we still talk about human rights and security, because these talks are not about useless process. It's about to stay on the same side and to believe to each other, to build this trust and to build this activity together, and to develop that statute which will be acceptable to each of the countries who will sign that agreement as a Rome Statute, which is international agreement, nothing else, and will participate on the process of judgment of Russian headquarters, because they started this awful war, and even Russians have to have concerns about the process, because their nation is suffering too physically. Unfortunately, not mentally, because they still believe that Putin is a strong guy. It's not a strong guy who are using weapons against others.
Thank you. Where there is a will, there is a way. I think that sums up the history of establishing this special tribunal. Eva, do you have any concluding remarks?
No, we are speaking a lot about aggression of Russia and Ukraine. And I want to emphasize it, that when we are talking about threats to democracy, we have to be also aware that our European democracy is under threat. And I very much sympathize with what Olga said, that what we need right now is courage. And we have to learn this courage and resilience from our Ukrainian friends. And I'm sorry to say, I'm not that optimistic for the coming years. I believe that democracy is going to be constantly under threat within the European Union and outside. Talking about election processes, the elections are now not rigged in most of the countries in a kind of obvious way that you showed, but the whole electoral process is really being undermined in many, many countries in a much more subtle way, and with the use of social media, among others, but not only. And we can wake up one moment, and not in a long future, that half of the countries that are part of European Union will be ruled by those who were democratically elected, but who are coming into the authoritarian rule and regime. So talking about what OSCE can also do, maybe to include in the guidelines and textbooks of how to monitor elections, maybe not only in the Central Eastern Europe or outside, but also in Western European countries, let's call them that. The whole process of monitoring, including monitoring what's going on in the social media. And I'm not so optimistic when I look back at how it was easier to, let's say, fight with the authoritarian regimes back in the 1970s or 1980s, and how much more complicated it is now. Because, you know, when I see this huge polarization, and I envy you that you don't have it, because in most of the countries of Europe, and not only in the States too, there is. And the problem is that we do not, because of the social media bubbles and the way that these algorithms are programming us, we are not talking to one another anymore. So another thing, I don't know whether it's for OSCE, but it's certainly for civil society, is to try to recreate public spaces in which people meet physically and talk to one another, coming from different backgrounds and different outlooks, because as long as we do not get out of this algorithm and bubbles, we are going to be not a democratic society, but two tribes fighting one another. And there's no democracy without the center, and there's no democracy without the common place where people meet and disagree, but at least try to understand what one another is saying. So my big appeal is to the European Union to be courageous also on enforcement of all this legislation that they passed, because there is legislation, there are strategies, there are a lot of words, but there is no enforcement. We need enforcement and education and courage.
Thank you. We are soon to close, but I am very tempted to ask Ambassador Ellen a final question. It's related to the Norwegian government, who recently issued a white paper on the Council of Europe. It was planned to include the OSCE. When will that white paper come?
I hope it will come. I can't say when. There is a little bit of the OSCE there, but I think we will see more work on the OSCE and its future. And I think the reason is because it is an organization that has proven resilient. It's an organization that needs to adapt, but I also think it's an organization that needs to retain what is working. And I think it's an organization that needs to focus on diplomacy, that needs to be patient. I know you're going to see the Helsinki effect very soon. I mean, we have to recall that it took 14 years between the Final Act and that things really started, that civil society grew strong in Europe. And I think we have to bear that in mind, that sometimes this difficult patience and in that hope has to be part of it.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the panelists and also to the audience. I think you have all been very patient today. We will have a 15 minutes break where you can grab some food, and only 15 minutes because we are going to watch this excellent film. And it will be introduced by one of the producers, Torvald Nilsen. So when he enters the scene, that's when you go back to the seat. Sorry. Thank you.